welcome to the Deep Dive. Our mission here, as always, is pretty simple. We take some of the most influential, most challenging texts in history, and we try to extract the essential, game-changing knowledge you need.
And today, we're doing more than just wrestling with a text.
Oh, much more. We are strapping ourselves in for, well, a philosophical demolition derby, and our guide is Friedrich Nietzsche.
Indeed. We are opening up beyond good and evil. And this is a book that, it functions less like a calm philosophical treatise and more like a high-voltage bomb detonated right under the foundations of Western thought.
That's a good way to put it.
It is an immediate, aggressive, and often, frankly, a profoundly uncomfortable interrogation of every single moral and philosophical assumption that we just take for granted.
And for this deep dive, we're focusing on his most radical points. We're using his own polemical writing as the source material to really get a handle on the Nietzschean method.
Which is all about radical self-questioning, historical critique, and this constant demand for new, independent spirits.
Exactly. So before we even touch on morality or society, we have to start where Nietzsche starts.
Right.
And that's by questioning the single most sacred assumption in, well, all of philosophy.
Truth. The assumption is the unquestioned, inherited value we place on truth itself.
Right.
It's a concept so fundamental we barely ever pause to ask if it's even justified.
And that's the genius of his opening move, isn't it? He asks this ultimate skeptical question. Suppose we want truth. Why not rather untruth and uncertainty, even ignorance?
Why is the will to truth our default setting?
Yeah, why do we automatically assume that's the right way to approach a problem?
And he finds it completely suspicious that for, thousands of years, every metaphysician, no matter how cautious they claim to be, never even considered this doubt.
They all just started from the same place.
They all shared an initial faith, a fundamental prejudice, what he calls the faith in opposite values.
Okay, opposite values. So like true versus untrue, good versus bad.
Exactly. The core belief that true must be superior to untrue, that good must be superior to evil, or that selflessness is inherently better than selfishness.
And what he suggests from there is just. It's devastating to that whole ethical project. He suggests that these opposites, they might not even exist at all.
Right. We rely on these binaries, these neat little categories, to define our whole world. But he calls them foreground estimates.
The foreground
provisional judgments that we project onto a reality that is infinitely more complex.
So they're necessary fictions.
Exactly. He's asking us to really consider that these valuations, true, false, good, bad, they might be useful fictions for us to live and communicate, but they are not the reality of the world itself. He uses that marvelous phrase, the frog perspective.
Let's unpack that frog perspective a bit because it's such a powerful image. It's an analogy for our limitations, right?
Precisely. So imagine a frog sitting at the bottom of a deep well. Its entire worldview is defined and limited by the small circle of light at the top of that well. It sees just a tiny slice of the sky, but it operates as if that slice is the entire universe.
And for Nietzsche, that's us with morality.
That's us. He argues that our popular moral valuations are exactly like this. We are so constrained by our own history, our own physiology, our own needs, that we mistake our necessary local, provisional perspective for universal objective truth.
Which means the entire edifice of Western morality, you're talking Plato, Christianity, Kant, it's all potentially built on a necessary lie.
Or at least a perspective we adopted to survive, not to actually know.
And if you follow that logic, the consequences are just. They're immediate and incredibly destabilizing.
They are. Because Nietzsche then proposes that deception, selfishness, and lust might in fact hold a higher and more fundamental value for life than truth, honesty, and selflessness.
Higher value for life. That's the key.
That's the key. If the goal is life enhancement, strength, perpetuation, if life itself is the ultimate value, then what we label evil might be entirely indispensable to that fundamental process. It just flips the moral dictionary on its head.
Okay, so let's turn our attention now to the second great pillar of certainty he attacks. So if truth is out, what's left?
The self, the thinking subject, the one thing we feel we can always fall back on.
The I think. Descartes' famous line, I think, therefore I am. But of course, Nietzsche tears that down too.
Oh, completely. He sees that claim, I think, not as some immediate, undeniable certainty, but as a really dangerous assertion that conceals a whole web of metaphysics.
To most people, it feels so obvious, though.
Of course. But a philosopher today, he suggests, meets that claim with a smile and two question marks.
Now, this is where we really need to slow down and identify the assumptions he sees hidden inside that simple three-word phrase.
Okay, so first, the statement asserts that there is an I, a fixed thing, a substance that performs the action of thinking.
The doer behind the deed.
The doer behind the deed. Second, it asserts that thinking is an activity, an operation, and that this ego is a cause, a distinct cause separate from the effect, which is the thought.
And third.
Third, and this is maybe the most arrogant part, it asserts that we already know what thinking is, that we have some established, self-evident standard for identifying it, as opposed to, say, willing or feeling or perceiving.
It's fascinating because he draws an analogy to language. We say the lightning flashes.
Right.
And we automatically assume there's a thing, the lightning, that is the cause of the action flashing.
And Nietzsche argues we do the exact same thing with thought. We presume there's a fixed I that causes the mental activity. But he insists this entire structure, the subject, the predicate, the doer, and the deed, it's just inherited from grammar.
Not from reality itself.
Not from reality. We got this linguistic habit from language, and then we turned it into a metaphysical belief. But if you peel away that habit, there is no necessary I who is causing the thought. There is just thought itself.
So if we're not a fixed I doing the thinking, and if our knowledge just relies on looking back and comparing our current mental state to a past one to label it thinking, then that immediate certainty just evaporates.
It's gone. And this deconstruction extends immediately to another popular concept, which is the will.
Right. He really targets Schopenhauer here.
He does. Schopenhauer treated the will as this one truly known thing, the inner essence of all reality. But Nietzsche just says Schopenhauer inflated a popular prejudice.
So how does he break down the act of willing itself? Because if willing isn't just one simple act, then it's a lot harder to assign blame or praise to it.
Willing, for Nietzsche, is not unified at all. It's a unit only as a word. In reality, when you experience it, it's a complex plurality of sensations.
What kind of sensations?
Well, when we will something, we experience the sensation of the state we're moving away from, the sensation of the state we're striving towards, and also the sensation of the muscle movement, the tension required for the act itself.
That covers the physical side, but what about the mental or the psychological part?
Crucially, willing always includes a ruling thought. He says you cannot sever the thought, the command, from the willing.
So the thought is in charge.
The ruling thought determines the direction and the purpose. The will, therefore, is an active command. The commanding part, the dominant drive, expressed as a thought, identifies itself with the act. And the obeying parts, our body, our nerves, our subordinate drives, they feel the compulsion.
And this analysis of will leads him straight into his rejection of free will and causality. Let's start with freedom of the will. Why does he call that the greatest self-contradiction conceived so far?
Because the deep desire behind the idea of free will is this impossible wish to be the causa sui.
The cause of oneself.
The cause of oneself. It is the absolute ultimate expression of human pride. To be entirely free means you bear the entire ultimate responsibility for every single action, every thought. It absolves God, chance, society, your parents, everything.
It's like trying to pull yourself into existence by your own hair, as he says.
It's metaphysical hubris masquerading as liberation.
Exactly.
Right.
But he doesn't stop there. He's equally dismissive of the opposite idea, unfree will, which is often used by determinist thinkers.
Right, the idea that we're just machines.
And he argues that the belief in unfree will is simply a misuse of the concepts of cause and effect.
And he's incredibly radical about causality itself. He says cause and effect are just conventional fictions for the purpose of designation and communication.
This is a huge point that people often miss. We use causality as a tool. We use it to label and communicate observations A happened, then B happened. Fine.
But that's not an explanation.
No. When we claim that B necessarily followed A, that there's some rigid law there, we are imposing our symbolic language onto the world. We are, in his words, acting mythologically.
So even science is just using a kind of convenient shorthand.
In a way, yes. The mechanistic naturalizing of thought, where scientists claim every thought is just a necessary effect of nerves or biochemistry, is, in his view, just doltishness.
In the thing in itself, there is no necessity, no law. The effect doesn't follow the cause. We are the ones who devised necessity and constraint to organize our messy world. We shouldn't confuse our map for the territory.
So, if both free will and unfree will are fictions, one coming from pride, the other from a linguistic mistake, what's left? What's the reality of human action?
Nietzsche insists that when you strip all that away and look at the raw dynamic of life, it is only a matter of strong and weak wills.
Not free or unfree, just strong or weak.
Exactly. All this talk of being constrained or compelled by psychological necessity is often just a symptom of a personal weakness in the thinker himself, a weakness that's masquerading as a universal law. The strong will creates its own necessity. The weak will just accepts one that's already there.
That shift away from the abstract, moralizing language of responsibility and causality to this amoral dynamic of strength and weakness, that feels like the perfect entry point into his next great theme.
The intensely personal nature of all philosophy.
Exactly. If objective truth and the unified self are fictions, then philosophy can't be a detached search for universal laws anymore. It has to become deeply personal.
It's the only logical consequence. If the thinker cannot escape their own drives, then their system of thought is inevitably a reflection of their own inner hierarchy of those drives.
So every great philosophy is an involuntary autobiography.
An involuntary and unconscious memoir, or a personal confession of its author, yes.
So when a philosopher like Kant creates a system of ethics, or Plato creates his world of forms, what's the real engine driving it all?
It's the moral or immoral intentions that form the real germ of life. The abstract claims about the noumenal world or the categorical imperative, those are just the rationalized defense mechanisms for that core driving intention.
This completely changes how we should read the history of philosophy.
It does.
He suggests that when you're trying to understand a philosopher's most abstract claims, you should start by asking, at what morality does he aim?
Right. What is the ultimate value judgment that this entire complex system is designed to justify or to create?
So we should see Plato's forms, or Kant's sense of duty, or Schopenhauer's pessimism, not as attempts to describe objective reality,
but as highly sophisticated expressions of their creator's dominant, deeply rooted personal drives, whether that's a drive for asceticism, self-discipline, or resignation.
And this brings up a really crucial distinction he makes, doesn't it? The difference between a true philosopher and a scholar.
Yes, this is key. The scholar can afford to have an isolated drive to knowledge, focused very narrowly on, say, fungi or philology. It operates like a small, detached clockwork.
Their real interests could be anywhere.
Their true interests might be money or family or politics. Their scholarship is just a profession, a hobby. The scholar is, in that sense, impersonal.
But the philosopher is the absolute opposite.
The philosopher is intensely personal. In the genuine philosopher, every basic human drive, not just the drive for knowledge, but ambition, lust, cruelty, wants to be master, and it attempts to philosophize in that spirit.
So their philosophy isn't some detached activity.
No, it's the battlefield where their innermost drives wrestle for supremacy. And the philosophical system that results is the decided and decisive witness to who they truly are.
So if philosophy is driven by this desire to dominate and define, Nietzsche calls it a tyrannical drive itself, the most spiritual will to power, seeking the creation of the world. Let's use his famous critique of the Stoics to see what he means by this creative tyranny.
Okay, a great example. The Stoics famously commanded, live according to nature. They believed that nature was rational, ordered, and that wisdom was just about aligning yourself with that inherent logic.
Which on the surface sounds pretty reasonable.
It does, until Nietzsche asks us to actually look at nature as it is, wasteful beyond measure, indifferent beyond measure, without purposes and consideration, without mercy and justice, fertile and desolate and uncertain at the same time.
So how can you possibly live according to that chaos and indifference?
You can't. The very act of living, of striving for anything, is inherently non-natural in that indifferent sense. Living requires you to estimate, to prefer, to be unjust, to be limited, to be one-sided. It is an act of defiance against nature's own wastefulness.
So the Stoics weren't following nature at all. They were commanding nature to be stoic.
Exactly. They were imposing their own order, their own self-discipline, their own desire for logical clarity onto the chaos of existence.
It wasn't obedience. It was creation.
It was a tyrannical drive to remake the world in their own image, making it simple and severe and manageable. And this leads us to the grand unifying hypothesis he draws from all of this.
The will to power.
The will to power. If we've stripped away objective truth, fixed substance, and traditional causality, what is the single underlying reality that remains?
This is the core of the hypothesis.
He challenges us with this audacious thought experiment, a demand of what he calls the conscience of method. Suppose, he says, that the only thing given as real is our inner world of desires, passions, and drives. can we use this internal known quantity to understand the external mechanistic world?
Since we already know the causality of the will in ourselves, this commanding and obeying dynamic of our inner life, I have to test the hypothesis that the will is the only kind of causality there is.
The proposition is will must affect will. So when we see movement and force out in the physical world, we have to try and interpret it as an expression of will affecting another will,
Rather than matter affecting matter.
which is just a remnant of that fictional doer concept we got from grammar.
So this is a radical reimagining of physics, really. Every force, every particle, every interaction is an expression of a power seeking to overcome or command another power.
And if we can successfully trace our entire instinctive life, all our complex drives, all our struggles back to the development of one basic form,
The will to power.
a drive for growth, overcoming, and mastery, then we gain the right to determine all efficient force universally as will to power. And the conclusion is monumental. The world, viewed from the inside, its intelligible character, would be will to power and nothing else.
So the universe isn't just a collection of inert matter subject to mechanical laws.
No, it's an unending dynamic clash of powers constantly striving for mastery. A universe where growth and struggle are the central metaphysical facts.
And if the will to power is the underlying reality, then our traditional moral categories of good and evil are just highly evolved strategies that serve that power dynamic.
Exactly.
This brings us to his genealogy of morality, which exposes how our concepts of right and wrong are really just changing tools of historical necessity.
He outlines 3 distinct, massive stages in how humankind has valued actions, and it all emphasizes a profound reversal of perspective over time.
So the first stage and the longest one was the pre-neural period. How was value assigned back then?
Value was derived entirely from the consequences of the action.
So did it work?
Did it work? Was the action successful? Did it save the tribe? Did it lead to honor or disgrace? The intention, the origin of the action was considered very little. Sometimes it was completely irrelevant.
He points to early Roman morality, I think.
Roman morality, ancient Chinese customs where a son's disgrace can retroactively shame his parents. The imperative to know thyself was completely unknown in this long, brutal, outcome-driven era.
And this leads into the second stage, the moral period. He says this is the last 10,000 years or so.
A relatively short time in human history, yeah. And this is where intention suddenly became everything.
How did that happen?
Well, driven by a refinement of vision, often spurred by aristocratic faith in things like ancestry and good blood, the value suddenly reversed from consequence to origin or intention. The action itself became secondary. If the intent was good, the action was laudable, even if the outcome was terrible.
And he calls this a calamitous new superstition. Why? Calamitous. Is it because it elevated a single psychological state intention above the reality of the action's effect in the world?
Precisely. It created a false internal focus. For millennia, moral praise and blame hinged entirely on the perceived intention. And this provided a necessary stability for complex societies, but it masked the true forces driving human behavior.
The deeper drives and instincts.
The deep-seated drives and instincts that defy simple intention.
Okay, and this brings us to the third stage, the one Nietzsche believes we are now just entering, the extramoral period. What does this final reversal of perspective reveal?
Here, we begin to suspect that the decisive value is actually located in the unintentional aspects of the action.
The unintentional, not the reason I think I'm doing something.
Exactly. The intentional part, the conscious choice, the stated reason, is merely the surface and skin. It's a symptom that requires a much deeper interpretation. It's the superficial manifestation of deeper, unconscious, hereditary drives.
So the idea is that I may intend to be generous, but the real value or lack of value lies in why I have the character that makes me generous.
Right. Is it an unconscious compulsion? A drive that seeks recognition? A deep-seated fear of being alone?
So the whole moral system of intentions is now seen as just a prejudice.
Like astrology or alchemy. A necessary historical phase, but one that he insists must be overcome. And this work of interpreting the unintentional, this work of the free spirit, is the long secret work reserved for the finest consciences of the future.
And part of that overcoming involves questioning even the most seemingly beautiful moral sentiments, like self-sacrifice or living for others.
Yeah.
Why does he see those with such suspicion?
Because they have too much charm and sugar. They're so aesthetically and socially pleasing that we stop questioning their utility or their origin.
They're seductive.
They're seductions. And he insists they must be treated as such. Is it truly selflessness, or is it a subtle, powerful mechanism for asserting superiority or control, or just receiving the pleasure of pity?
Yet for all his revolutionary call to overcome morality, he absolutely does not advocate for anarchy or just letting go. He sees constraint as essential.
Oh, absolutely. He's very clear. Every morality, even the most constrained and seemingly unnatural ones, is a necessary piece of tyranny against nature. But this tyranny is absolutely invaluable for the ultimate refinement of humanity.
So how does constraint lead to freedom and greatness?
He uses this powerful analogy of language and art. Why do we impose arbitrary rules like metrical constraint, rhyme, or fixed grammatical structures on art? It's not to make it easier.
Right, it makes it harder.
It's because freedom, subtlety, mastery, the true artist's expression, evolved only by virtue of the tyranny of such arbitrary laws. The centuries of ecclesiastical or Aristotelian or Cartesian discipline that limited European thought were not wasted.
They were necessary.
They were the necessary constraint that produced the spiritual tension and refinement capable of producing future free spirits.
So the specific nature of the law is almost irrelevant. What matters is the length and severity of the obedience to it.
Yes. The imperative is not some abstract, self-justifying categorical imperative like Kant's. It is nature's raw demand driven by the will to power. Thou shalt obey someone and for a long time. Otherwise thou shalt perish and lose all respect for thyself.
It's brutal.
It is. But this protracted obedience, though violent, is what disciplines the spirit, creating the complexity, the ingenuity, and the reason that define higher types of humanity.
This concept of protracted obedience and the spiritual domestication that results from it, that's so central to his scathing analysis of modern European culture.
It is. He sees it as dangerously dominated by the herd instinct.
And that long training of obedience has resulted in one powerful inherited instinct.
The need to obey. And when this instinct is dominant, it naturally gravitates towards systems that promise equality, safety, and comfort. The rise of democratic ideals, equality of rights, the glorification of sympathy for Nietzsche, this is the triumph of the herd animal man.
And this creates a crisis for leadership, doesn't it?
Right.
A true commander can no longer just stand up and command.
No, absolutely not. They have to practice what he calls the moral hypocrisy of the commanders. They have to pretend they're merely executors of more ancient or higher commands.
Or they're just the first servant of the people.
Exactly. The leader has to masquerade as just serving the collective will because the herd man sees independent, strong-willed command as inherently dangerous.
And what qualities does this herd man glorify? What's the new virtue?
Those qualities that are useful for maintaining the herd, so benevolence, moderation, modesty, and most importantly, pity.
And anyone who stands out.
Anyone who stands out, the individual with lofty spiritual independence, deep originality, or great intelligence, is viewed with suspicion and fear because they introduce dangerous variation and potential conflict.
And he connects the very origin of this modern morality to fear itself. Specifically, the fear of one's neighbor once society becomes stable.
This is a crucial historical insight he has. In early dangerous societies, the strong, expansive drives, enterprise, ambition, rapacity, the will to dominate were honored.
Because they were useful.
Precisely because they were useful for protecting the community against external enemies. The strong man was the protector.
But once the community is secured, once the walls are up, those same powerful internal drives suddenly become a threat.
A threat to the internal equality and peace. The energy that once conquered the external enemy now threatens the community's self-confidence and stability.
And those drives are suddenly branded as immoral.
They are, and the highest virtue shifts to being the mean and average in desires. It becomes glorious to be small and predictable and harmless.
And this morality of timidity, he says, culminates in a kind of morbid softening that even extends to how society treats its criminals.
Yes. The ultimate expression of the herd instinct is the impulse to abolish punishment and take the side of the criminal.
But not out of a sense of justice.
No, not out of true justice, but because the idea of punishing is unpleasant and makes the herd afraid. It is the desire to sanitize life entirely, leading to the ultimate herd imperative. We waste that there will one day no longer be anything to fear.
This makes his rejection of philosophies based on pleasure and pain so much clearer. Things like utilitarianism and hedonism.
He dismisses them entirely as foreground modes of thought and naiveties.
Just shallow,
The idea that the goal of human life is to abolish suffering, to achieve mere comfortable well-being, is seen as an end that makes man ludicrous and contemptible.
So why is the avoidance of suffering such an affront to the will to power?
Because Nietzsche believes in the discipline of suffering. He argues that great suffering, and great suffering alone, has created every single elevation of mankind.
It's the crucible.
It is the crucible that forces us to cultivate strength, inventiveness, bravery, and profundity. Without the challenge of pain and hardship, the spirit just remains shallow and weak.
And this creates an ultimate philosophical conflict of pity.
It does. You have the popular Christian herd pity for the creature in man, the part that needs to be sheltered and pampered and preserved.
But then Nietzsche introduces the opposite pity.
The profound concern that defends against that pampering, against weakening the potential for greatness. It's the pity that recognizes that if you save everyone, you damage the future of man.
And to structure this conflict, he uses the very famous distinction between master morality and slave morality. Let's make sure we understand the origin and the structure of each one.
Okay, so the master morality originates from a ruling noble caste. It comes from an overflowing affirmative feeling, a feeling of plenitude and superabundance of power.
They are the creators of value.
They are. They define good as noble, powerful, brave, and life-affirming. Bad is defined simply as the opposite: despicable, cowardly, and timid.
So the master defines himself first, and then defines the opposite as bad. It's an affirmation of the self.
Exactly. The noble man practices self-glorification. If he helps someone who is unfortunate, it's not from a sense of duty or pity, but from an impulse of superabundance of power, a natural overflowing.
He reveres what is hard.
He reveres everything severe and hard, and has a radical enmity toward selflessness because he sees it as self-debasement. And crucially, the master has duties only to his equals. Towards those of a lower rank, he is essentially beyond good and evil.
Okay, so then the slave morality, where does that come from and what is its goal?
It originates among the oppressed, the non-ruling classes, those with an unfavorable, pessimistic view of the powerful. Their system is fundamentally the morality of utility.
It's designed to make life bearable.
To alleviate their difficult existence. And it's born of resentment, a reactive, poisonous envy.
So how do they define good?
Here, good means safe, useful, kind, helpful. Evil, then, is defined as powerful, dangerous, and dreadful, all the attributes of the master who oppresses them.
Right.
They often equate good with being stupid or a bonhomme, a good-natured simpleton, because the truly good man must be predictable, harmless, and easily deceived. The slave morality champions freedom and happiness ends, which, as we've seen, Nietzsche finds contemptible.
And the concept of vanity is a perfect tool he uses for diagnosing which morality is operating in a person.
Yes, vanity is an extraordinary atavism, a regression. The noble man has an internal assignment of value. He doesn't need external validation.
But the vain person is different.
The vain person is the slave in one's blood. He's waiting for others to assign his value, which historically was the peculiar right of masters. The vain person is just demonstrating the oldest instinct of subjection, subjugating his own sense of self-worth to external opinions.
So if morality is a tool of class and circumstance, then religion too must be viewed not as some sacred truth,
but as a historical instrument serving the will to power of various groups.
This brings us to his cold, calculated analysis of religion's utility.
He insists that the philosopher of the future has to understand this instrumental function and be prepared to use religion solely for the work of education and breeding. They are not ends in themselves. He identifies three key political and psychological uses.
Okay, the first is for the ruling caste. How does religion serve the people at the top?
It acts as a political bond and a powerful means of command. By creating a higher divine authority, religion effectively betrays and hands over the consciences of the ruled to the ruler.
It's a spiritual means of control.
A highly effective one for overcoming resistance to political or social rule. He cites the Brahmins in ancient India, who, by making themselves the highest spiritual caste, maintained their aloofness while they nominated and justified the power of kings.
That's fascinating. It lets the rulers get on with the business of ruling.
It allows them to pursue more refined political tasks without worrying about internal spiritual resistance.
Okay, what about the second use? For rising classes.
For classes trying to work their way up from the rabble, who possess rougher instincts and inherited passions, Puritanism and asceticism are indispensable means of education and ennobling.
It's a form of discipline.
It provides the necessary, brutal, long-term constraint, the great self-overcoming that's required to master their origin and prepare them for future command. It disciplines their body and spirit into the uniformity and reliability that's necessary for holding power.
And the final use, for the vast majority drudges who exist for service.
For them, religion provides invaluable contentment with their nature and station.
It's an opiate.
It is a necessary opiate. It sheds a sunshine of meaning over their perpetual drudgery, making their own lowliness tolerable. It's an art of teaching even the lowliest to set themselves in an apparently higher, eternal order of things, providing a psychological stability that's essential for maintaining a vast workforce.
So religions like Christianity and Buddhism show their utility here by comforting the suffering masses, making their suffering useful and justifiable within a larger cosmic plan.
Yes. They act as a philosophy for higher-ranking sufferers, making suffering seem noble. This preserves the social order by giving the worker a reason to tolerate his lot. But this is where the danger lies.
The uncanny perilousness. When does religion stop being a useful tool of breeding and start becoming a tool of corruption?
When it becomes a sovereign, final end in itself. Religions for sufferers, particularly Christianity, seek to preserve the surplus of failures of the sick, the degenerate, the fragile, of those who are bound to suffer.
And Nietzsche argues these are the people who, according to the principle of life enhancement and selective evolution,
They ought to perish.
and to justify this preservation of the weak, the religion has to fundamentally reverse all prior life-affirming values.
Precisely. They have to stand all evaluations on their head. They smash the strong and the joyful. They cast suspicion on health, beauty, and intellectual pride. And they reverse the love of the earthly and of dominion over the earth into a hatred of the earth and the earthly.
And the result, in Europe, has been devastating for the species, according to this view.
His conclusion is stark. The historical effect of European Christianity has been to keep the type man on a dangerously lower level by preserving too much of what should have been destroyed or suppressed.
A sublime abortion.
Viewing the history of the last 18 centuries with an unconcerned eye, he suggests one dominant will is apparent: the will to make of man a sublime abortion. Man has become over-spiritualized, weakened, and filled with self-contempt.
So we've established that the old foundations are gone and the current moral order is, in his view, corrupting humanity. This necessitates a terrifying responsibility.
The creation of new values.
He calls for a new kind of human, the philosopher of the future, who must be a commander and a lawgiver.
These new spirits, he says, must be strong and original enough to start antithetical evaluations and to fundamentally revalue those internal values. They must overcome the accidental, nonsensical drift of history and purposefully determine humanity's trajectory.
And he baptizes this new species the attempters. What characterizes their temperament?
They are defined by their profound independence. They will love their own truths, but they will never be dogmatists. They shed the bad taste of wanting to agree with many, recognizing that whatever is easily common always has little value.
So their pride dictates.
My judgment is my judgment. No one else is easily entitled to it. They are free spirits, but they must be something more, higher, greater, and thoroughly different.
That sounds like a tremendous, almost impossible task.
Yeah.
How does he distinguish the true philosopher, the lawgiver, from the philosophical laborers we have today?
This is a crucial distinction for him. The philosophical laborers, like Kant and Hegel in his view, are simply scholars. They identify, organize, and codify existing values.
They're historians, really.
They take a great fact of historical valuation that has become dominant like Christian or Enlightenment morality, and they reduce it to formulas. They make the past clear, distinct, intelligible, and manageable. They are primarily historians and codifiers.
But the true philosopher doesn't merely arrange. They create.
The true philosopher is a commander and a lawgiver who determines the wherefore and whither of mankind. They reach for the future with a truly creative hand. Their knowing is not passive observation. Their knowing is creating.
So their ultimate will to truth is
Merely an instrument of the will to power. They are the artist legislators of the human species.
And to accomplish this colossal task of value creation, the philosopher has to embody a multitude of contradictory roles.
Yes, they must have traversed the entire range of human experience and valuation. They must have been a critic, a skeptic, a dogmatist, a historian, a moralist, and a poet. But these roles are only preconditions. Their final, actual task is the creation of values, establishing the new hierarchy, the new imperative for humanity.
Given the profoundly dangerous, non-consensus nature of these new values, It follows that such a profound spirit must adopt a kind of secrecy. This is the necessity of the mask.
A profound spirit absolutely requires a mask, sometimes of rudeness or deliberate misdirection, to conceal precious and vulnerable things from the shallow interpretation of the crowd.
The herd.
The herd interprets every word, every action, falsely, namely, shallowly.
So the mask is a defense mechanism for vulnerability.
It is. A philosopher might intentionally appear, as he puts it, rude and round as an old green wine cask with heavy hoops, to protect the delicacy of their deeper shame and insight. Because of the constant misinterpretation, a protective, often contradictory, mask grows continually around every profound spirit, making them unreadable to the common eye.
And this necessity of the mask dictates the necessity of solitude.
The philosopher of the future must be the most solitary, the most concealed, the most divergent. They must be the man beyond good and evil, the master of his virtues, the superabundant of will.
And their greatness isn't in specialization.
No, it lies in their ability to be manifold as whole, as vast as full.
But this path of profound independence, of becoming a lawgiver, it multiplies the dangers of life. You can't be tied down by conventional loyalties.
No, and the great test is knowing how to conserve oneself against all the loyalties that drain your strength. You must not remain stuck to family or fatherland or pity for higher men or even to one's own virtues.
Even your own virtues can be a trap.
Even one's own virtues, if taken to excess like honesty or selflessness, can become a vice that destroys the potential for greatness. The independent spirit must constantly self-test and self-correct.
So, we have completed our deep dive into the storm of beyond good and evil, the fiction of truth, the mythology of the self, the tyrannical nature of moral constraint, the dangers of the democratic herd.
And the terrifying responsibility of the new philosopher as the creator of values.
The monumental takeaway really seems to be that every foundational concept you rely on, truth, causality, the value of pity, is exposed as either a historical tool, a cultural prejudice, or a mask serving the collective will to power.
The entire system is overturned.
And this overturning demands a radical kind of independence. It requires a form of honesty that, if it tires of its own hardness, must call upon its own devils, its malice, its curiosity, its spiritual will to power, just to remain true to itself and avoid falling back into the comfort of the herd.
And to close, Nietzsche leaves us with this provocative ideal, one that's so far removed from the moralizing gods of tradition. He links the philosopher of the future to the god Dionysus.
The great equivocator and tempter.
Exactly. And Dionysus, in a dialogue, admits his love for mankind, but only in the sense that he sees man as an agreeable, brave, inventive animal.
And he often thinks about how he can still further advance man and make him, what was the phrase?
To make him stronger, more evil, and more profound. That is the ideal of the tempter god, smiling with his halcyon smile.
Which challenges you, the listener, to consider the ultimate test. What does it mean to be faced with a divine ideal that demands strength and malevolence rather than traditional goodness?
Do you possess the courage, the intellectual honesty, and the self-mastery for such an independent path, one that requires you to actively stand beyond good and evil?
Ultimately, Nietzsche suggests, the strength of a spirit is measured according to how much of this painful, demanding truth, the reality of the will to power one, can still barely endure.
And for those who are strong enough to endure it, Dionysus points to a world of endless creation where the only limit is the will itself.